All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Brother Augustine channel, where my guests and I seek to edify, entertain, and educate the world from an Orthodox Christian perspective. My guest today is Father Michael Lillie. So before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Father, for being with us here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. Kind of a funny story. When I reached out to you to ask for the interview, I actually mistook you for a different Rocor priest because I'm subscribed to both of your channels and there was a mix up. But then I realized I was also subscribed to yours, not just the other guys. We got to talking. And you told me when we spoke on the phone, you had this great program for the men at your parish about the 7 pillars of Orthodox masculinity that I hope to get to here in just a minute, which I think is such an important topic. The dearth, the lack of masculinity in today's world, Orthodox and secular, frankly.
Mhm.
But before we get to that, do you want to take a couple minutes maybe to kind of introduce yourself and let us know your Christian story? Are you cradle Orthodox? Did you convert? When did you become a priest? And kind of things of that nature.
Sure. I grew up as a Roman Catholic in the great state of Arizona. So I'm from the Southwest. I lived there for most of my life. As a young kid, I did move around a little bit. My dad was a Marine, so I come from a military family. Um, and So I was raised Roman Catholic. Fairly consistent in going to church, but not. I wouldn't say we were overly pious family, overly dedicated, which proved to be, a kind of a downfall later on. I kind of walked away from church as is a common thing for many young people these days. So by the time I went to college, I was pretty much agnostic about anything when it got regarding God or the divine. I wouldn't outright deny it, but I didn't. I wasn't practicing, and nor did I give it much thought. But Fast forward, you maybe many years after through college, I was married, and I felt like my life, like many people, I just wasn't doing it right. I had a lot of weaknesses, a lot of things that didn't seem to make sense in my life, and I, I had the realization that maybe I'm just, a master of my own mistakes. I didn't, I kind of had to come to the conclusion that I wasn't always in control. So
Mm.
I returned back to the Roman Catholic Church, and it was really pushed full head. I felt very convicted to learn about my faith, right? To learn it good. And if anyone really truly is being honest with themselves and they're a Roman Catholic, um, you might uh, find that Orthodoxy is actually the Catholicism you thought you always uh, were told about in whatever in your catechism classes. I found that to be true. I studied, as many of us do. We fall into the mistake of trying to study history in the fathers, we come to the realization that, oh my gosh, maybe what I was taught wasn't really true. Maybe the Orthodox Church is the church that they taught me, and so I came to that conclusion. And my wife and I, we converted to Orthodoxy. It was kind of a long process to get there. But we did, and we did so in the Russian church. We a nice young small mission parish that we found and felt at home at. And thanks be to God, I was led to seminary. I went to St. Tikhon Seminary, and was ordained a priest in the Russian Church abroad in 2013. So this coming in about 5 months, 6 months, I'll be 10 years as a priest. And then that I've served a couple of different parishes as rector. I currently serve at Nativity of Christ Orthodox Church in Youngstown, Ohio. It's a parish in the Moscow Patriarchate, which I know is confusing for some people. But I've been, my bishop in Chicago has given blessings for me to be the rector here, since they did not have a priest to fulfill um, the duties here of this parish. And so I've been here at this parish for almost 7 years come this March. So we've had a nice run here in Youngstown. This is home for us. We've got a good parish community that has grown, especially in the last 3-4 years, which I know a lot of parishes have took in the COVID era. Some of them have blossomed because of this. And our parish has done so as well. And the topic at hand, it's become very important to me. I've got 2 young boys, and as I look at my past as a young man, and how do I want to teach my boys to be a better man than I was, and how do I do that in the face of a world that seems to put men down, put masculinity down, that they see it as toxic, as you hear that term, toxic masculinity. So how would I teach my boys, most importantly, how to be faithful men, and also to live their calling as God has intended them to. And so I come up with a set of principles, and I'm still trying to work through them myself on this, but I think they're a good set that we all, as a Christian men, should be striving towards working on. And so we can go over one of those when you're ready, some of those.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned something in your story, though, I'd like to just dig a little bit deeper on, if that's okay, before we get to the masculinity thing. So there's a lot of converts from Roman Catholicism to Eastern Orthodoxy in this country.
Yes.
Do you remember what questions you had at the time, or what resources you came across that led you to start questioning whether Roman Catholicism was the church you thought it was?
Well, I think like many people, I saw the fruit on the ground in parish life, right? I mean, we're going to find hypocrisy within the church all the time, because we're sinner. Everyone's a sinner in the church, but I found it especially evident in parish life, where the liturgical life was a little bit dead. It didn't seem like people, were living their faith as you read about it in the catechisms. There's a lot of people that just didn't. And when I say people, I probably was included in this. Just didn't have a fervor for living out their faith, and there are of course, some theological tenets that I came to believe, that such as the ancestral sin versus original sin, that nuances about that, the Pope coming in and seeing the universal, his universal rule. We actually attended a Eastern Catholic church for about 3 years or so before we even became Orthodox. It was a good transition for us, but just seeing how the Eastern Catholic churches were treated. I know there was a lot of things that I just, after studying the fathers, patristics, that didn't resonate in my correctly to me. And so, I came to believe that the Orthodoxy, and reading the catechism, you see this, they believe that the Orthodox church is fine and for all salvation, except for this caveat that, oh my gosh, they're not in a good relationship with the Pope. This, that's what it says in the Roman Catholic Catechism. So I goes, well, if I tend to believe the Orthodox got it right. The Roman Catholic Church seemed to believe that the Roman Catholic or the Orthodox Church is just fine to enter into salvation. So I'm going to pursue that, and that's what we did.
Fascinating. Okay. Well, thank you for that answer. I'm sure your story will resonate with some of the people watching. Now, last question before we get to the pillars of the masculinity, because I want to ask sort of a bigger picture question about why all this matters. So, and I'm not saying my own belief on this, I'm asking the question just for the sake of conversation here. So if men collectively fail to be masculine and they just kind of go off and become effeminate or weak, what's the problem with that? Isn't that just kind of their own individual deal, or is there a bigger societal issue with that, in terms of not just the running of society, but also our relationship to God as both people and a country? Like, what's the big deal if men aren't masculine, I suppose, is my question for the sake of this conversation.
Well, I think that we can't never lose sight of the fact that God created us in a certain way, in a certain image, and that we're called to live that out. We're not called to be this individual, and we'll get into maybe on this on one of the topics of emotion. But our feelings don't dictate who we are, right? But we are more than feelings, and so God created us in a certain way. God is truth, and if we define everything in such a manner that it's all dependent upon how I feel, I can be this way and be a true man that is false, and God isn't false. He's a man. He is truth himself, and so we have to find out what it is that he created us to be. Who did he want us to be, and how did he want us to act? we can blur the lines of what it means to be a man. And then there's certain ways, we're not all the same. I'll say that on the outset. We're not all going to act the same. We're not all have the same dispositions, and that, we don't need to be exact copies of everybody else. But at the same time, God has instilled in us some principles that we should live by. And if we allow the society to tell us how to do that, society that has no concern for our eternal salvation, rather than following what the church says, what we can find in Scripture, what we've inherited from the saints. If we follow what society says, we're missing the mark, and we're going to future generations, as we've already seen, are going to be affected by it. The men of today are not the men of yesterday. They're not. And so what we're saying is our forefathers that came before us were less enlightened. They didn't know how to be a true man. That we're more enlightened now. That's just not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so to help restore the sense of masculinity, both in society and individually within ourselves, we have to look to the church and the scriptures and our holy tradition rather than society, the secular society we live in. Of course, there have been Christian societies where these virtues and values were more inculcated, but obviously ours is kind of this upside down clown world where these things are not the norm as they should be. So in order to counteract that, at least in your sphere of influence, mainly your parish and the people that watch and listen to you on the internet, you've designed these 7 pillars of Orthodox masculinity that before we started recording, you told me you were actually fleshing out into an actual book at some point.
Correct.
So given that you have this plan, this outline, why don't we start with the first one and just kind of go through them and chat about them. And if anyone watching has questions, feel free to ask in the comments and we will get to them.
Sure. All right. So I've come up with 7. They could be, we could boil these down. Some of them have a little bit of overlapping, characteristics to them. We could actually find probably more traits, but I think 7's a good number. 7's a good scriptural number. It's a good traditional number. So I came up with 7. And first, and the very first one, that every man, we have to understand that we have to be is spiritually faithful. Okay, men. I think we've gotten into we can go through the statistics of what our current society in the West here in America is, where more than half of our country in the U.S. is not affiliated with any faith at all. And I'm not even talking Christian faith. I'm taking no faith at all. They're in that big category of nuns. And so we were created to worship. Man was created to worship. We have to be spiritually connected with God. And so when we're not that, we're not even living to the first step of what we were created to be. And so we have to be spiritually faithful. And as Orthodox Christians, that looks a certain way. We know that as Orthodox practitioners, but it doesn't have to be complicated. And so I follow the rule from in whether you find them controversial or not, but Father Thomas Hopko of blessed memory, he would say when he went to college, his mom, and he left home for the first time, his mom told him 3 things. He says, you got to go to church, and you got to say your prayers, and you got to remember God. And so to me, we don't have to look in the depths. We don't have to be these theologically inclined readers of the church fathers and the canons. We don't have to have that mind, but we have to be somebody that's committed to our faith, and we have to go to church regularly. We shouldn't ever wake up on a Sunday thinking, am I going to church today? Especially if you have a family, that should never be in question. Like, is today, I'm going today. I mean, there was a point in my life where that's why I fell away from the church, because I wasn't consistent in going. And I'm talking here as a Roman Catholic. It should never be a question. So you got to go to church. And then when you go to church, that means you're also taking part in the sacraments of the church, those healing mysteries that the church has for us, so that we can get closer to God. So go to church, be participants in the mystery, and also be prayer. We have to pray. Men pray. We're called to pray. We're called to commune to God, not only in the mysteries, but in prayer. And so when we don't have an ability to pray, or we don't do it, or we refuse to do it, we're not following through on what it means to be a man. And man primarily is, especially if he's a family man, he is the priest of his home. He is the leader of his home spiritually. I always tell my parishioners, who are men and who have children, I says the most important thing you can do in your house is to have your children see you pray. They have to see you leading them pray. It'll be a memory that it will be in their minds that their whole life. In fact, there's statistics out there, and I have them in my manuscript that I'm writing. But a father's dedication to his faith will mean exponentially more for a child than a mother's. And so the fathers that are faithful, very faithful in their practicing of their faith, will stay with that faith more so than any mother. A mom can sustain them. I'm not knocking mom's faith. I'm not knocking the grandmothers, especially during like the Soviet years. In the Soviet persecutions, they're the ones that kept the faith alive for the most part. But it's men who will keep perpetuate it now. Okay, it means way more. It means way more to children. So we pray. We have to be good at praying. If we're not good at praying, the only way to get better at praying is to do it more. This is like anything else. And finally, we got to remember God. So we have to be always mindful of that God is always with us. God's everywhere. That we are created to adore Him, to worship Him. We're created in His image, and so we got to live up to that high standard. And so we have to remember God. The Jesus prayer is a way. It's a good way of always remembering all throughout the day that I'm in the presence of God. I'm a child of God, and that I should be upholding a certain way of living. And so that's just boiling it down. To be spiritually faithful, this as a Christian, as an Orthodox Christian, just work on those three tenets. To work on this one principle of being faithful spiritually.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Father.
Yeah.
Now I have a question, and you and I might disagree on this. We didn't specifically talk about this topic either on our phone call or in the pre-show chat here. And I say this as someone who grew up in Reformed Judaism, but an atheist for all intents and purposes, despite being bar mitzvahed and all that stuff. And I realized quickly that the world was not designed, or at least our society, not designed to help men become masculine. And I started reading these self-help books that really kind of showed me, well, think about it. All your teachers are women, right? In school, like overwhelmingly in your first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade.
Sure. Yeah.
And society is kind of infected with this feminist influence. And so I fell in my late teens through my mid to late 20s into the pickup artist subculture, which at that time, for me, I thought, okay, this is where the true masculinity is that I was missing from the world, right? I'm red-pilled now. I'm out of the matrix. I found the truth. And then looking back on that, of course, it was a simulacrum of masculinity. It was fake masculinity, even though there were things that I came to understand there that I feel did benefit me as a male. So I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on, and again, we might disagree, on figures like Andrew Tate or Jordan Peterson, people who are very popular in kind of the more secular self-help world, people who might have some good things to teach. And I think they do have some good things to teach depending on where you're starting from, but who ultimately do not belong to a Christian tradition, or in Andrew Tate's case, apparently is now a Muslim.
Right. Well, first off, I can say that we can find good in some of the strangest places. So I agree with you that I think I've read some of Jordan Peterson's material. I guess his 12 principles. I've read through that. There's some really good, insightful information. I would recommend that. It's not a bad book. Andrew Tate, I'm less. I don't follow so much, until he was banned off of Twitter. I actually didn't even know who he was, and then right, yeah. But then after seeing it, after hearing that, I've been able to view some of his material that came across online and social media. I think that we're missing the boat and this is why masculinity gets such a bad rap, as toxic. From people like Andrew Tate. Well, he means well. He means to men to be a little tougher, and it sounds like, and a little bit more rugged, and bringing bravado. That's not necessarily manliness. And there can be and sometimes we might be hiding maybe some internal battles that we're fighting, and just masking it with some bravado. But if we don't approach things with a standpoint of, am I becoming closer to God? Am I becoming like God? Am I living in His image as He wants? Then we're missing the, in every facet. We have to live. That has to be the measure of everything. Christ is our measure, and so some of this secular self-help stuff is great. There's some good in it. I mean, heck, even Origen has some good stuff, but the church has condemned him. But you can find some good writings in Origen. We can't just dismiss the good that we find out there. But ultimately, and this is how I feel, it's got to be within the framing. This is the way God wants it? This is the way Christ created me? And am I getting closer to Him by living this way?
Great. Well, thank you for that answer, Father.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first pillar then is being spiritual, being faithful to God, right? Ideally, from what it sounds like, you were saying ideally, obviously, Orthodox Christian, but I'm not sure if you would agree that anything is better than nothing, like a Protestant is better than an atheist or something along those lines.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
Topic, but
I mean, our church would say the same. I mean, we even, and it's a controversial subject about, it gets into ecumenism and stuff. But our church, if you look at the canons, we recognize that there is some, even in schismatics and heretics, we decipher between the two, right? We don't say one is not in a relationship with God. We just say they have a bad relationship with God, but they have a relationship nonetheless.
Yeah, I would agree. And I've heard people of a very severe mindset, like saying that all of these other things are completely from the devil. There's no good there. But I went through Protestantism on my way to Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
And so I can never agree with that, just because I saw my own life change, like just picking up the Bible for the first time, being like, oh, wow, I want to try to adapt my life to this, even though I didn't have Orthodoxy. Certainly a lot closer than the way I've been living before.
100%. I think Father Stephen DeYoung, who's another, very he's made a name for himself because he's done some great work online. I heard him in an interview once to use the analogy that maybe for like Protestantism or those and are in not heterodox Christian faiths, they feed you. It may only be a turkey sandwich, but you can get fed on that. But in Orthodoxy, you get a Thanksgiving turkey dinner with all the fixings and all the trimmings, and it fulfills you way more. So I like to use that as an analogy. You can get fed on outside the church. I don't deny that. How the Holy Spirit works that way, we don't know. We know that the church, but we know it's full and alive within the Orthodox Church, and that this is the fullness of it. And so, we are made to worship God. God created us to have a relationship with Him. If we're not having that relationship with Him, even in a false way, we're not living out for our original calling.
No, I totally agree. So I'm thinking from the perspective of like a young man watching this, trying to understand himself and his place in the celestial and terrestrial hierarchies, so to speak, trying to figure out his way in the world. So he's thinking, okay, I believe in God. I'm Orthodox. I'm part of the church. I go to church. What else am I missing? What is pillar number 2 once we have that first one in place?
So, and I want you to all these that I'm speaking of. I should put that we follow the royal path, right? As an Orthodox Christian man, we should follow a royal path, and that royal path is one of balance, right? So we got to avoid extremes. And so when I go through these, we have to be mindful that we can't be too extreme in everything. And then I think the church teaches us this, right? We don't want to border on fanaticism and delusion, and we also don't want to be lukewarm and lax and lazy and any of these things that we go after. So I want to preface that. So the second one is we have to be mentally strong. Men need to be mentally strong. I've noticed. I've been through the military setting as an Air Force chaplain for a short period, and I've seen that, and I would consider myself growing up in a military family as people who are mentally strong. Like my dad instilled that in me growing up, that to be mentally strong. What does that look like, really, though? What does it mean to be mentally strong? I see that people. We have people that have very difficult times right now. We have a lot of people on SSRIs. We have a lot of people that are mentally disturbed, that are that turn to drugs and because they seems like this world, and it is a broken, difficult world, kind of breaks them easily. It's not easy out there. It's difficult. And so we as men have to understand that and come prepared, right? To do battle mentally. And I think part of this being mentally strong is that we're resilient. In the military, they use this word a lot with us, resilient. And so what does it mean to be resilient? It's just, so how do we bounce back from difficulty in our life? Like, do we have the ability to take some tragedy in our life, some difficulty, and to overcome it, come back and not let it really tear us down and affect us? And I think in many ways that we find ourselves in a world where a lot of people don't have the resources or ability or the strength, and the mental aptitude to be resilient in the face of difficulty. We're gonna find difficulty in this world that you can take to the bank. Our Lord told us as much, especially if we're very faithful to the church. How do we handle that? Can we be resilient in the face of that? And so we have to be mentally tough. And I think it's not a masculine trait. It's certainly not a Christian trait to be broken by difficulty. The church is there to help us with these things, but we have to be able to bounce back. And so further part of this be mentally tough and is that we have to be disciplined individuals, right? We have to be disciplined. We have to have a kind of a routine. We can't just be living our lives looking for motivation and inspiration to guide us. And I think a lot of us do that. We're always looking for someone to inspire us, someone to motivate us to do the things that we need. You don't need motivation. You don't need inspiration. You need commitment. And so to be mentally tough, you have to be disciplined. You got to do the things that are necessary in your life, even when you don't want to do them, even when you know it's difficult. And so that's mental toughness, and that's part of being a man. It's part of an Orthodox perspective too. I mean, we come from a long line of spiritually disciplined disciplines where we do things day in, day out. We know that life is difficult. We have the tools in the church, such as confession and repentance and these things to help us, get a grasp on, overcoming difficulties in our lives. And so this is a very much a Christian trait that we're talking about, but it's a very manly trait. We're not supposed to be weakness is I guess mental weakness is not to be shunned. We're all got issues. We should never shun people with mental illnesses, but I think a lot of us we don't put enough effort into overcoming difficulties. We kind of fold, and so we got to have a good balance here, on what it means to be mentally tough. You don't want to. Mental illness is real. Okay. And that's not what I'm trying to get to here. I'm just saying that we need to be somebody who's resilient, that we don't fold in the face of persecution, and that we're disciplined in our lives. So.
And I also feel that the secular world almost rewards a lack of resilience, because now people will identify, like you were saying, half people aren't affiliated with any religion. They'll identify with their brokenness and with their weakness, and they'll display it in their Twitter bio, almost like a badge of merit of some kind. Like, I have depression and bipolar and this, and I'm a drug addict, and I'm trans, and and instead of like working on it, they almost dig in deeper into it and latch onto it more because that's rewarded, right, in a certain sense in our world.
Sure. I mean, we do have people that, where it's the minorities or people with disabilities, or these people are looked at as protected classes, right?
Yeah.
Like we're always kind of like now juggling who's the most persecuted group out there, and we take we make a profile picture of it and say, this is who I am. We identify that because we want to let everyone know that I'm persecuted, I'm different. You gotta view me in a certain light. That's horrible. We don't want to be in a class of that. I mean, there are people out there like that, don't get me wrong, but we shouldn't like rejoice in the fact that we have difficulties. We should try to want to overcome it. We shouldn't just dwell on it. And just 100%.
So let's say someone is watching this video, they stumbled across it, and this hypothetical person, before they heard this conversation, was trying to win the gold medal in the Victim Olympics, and now they've decided, you know what? No, I want to be resilient, mentally strong. What would you recommend as a practical first step for a young man who wants to begin developing that sort of mental resilience and toughness?
Is it, well, we have to be disciplined. I think it is the discipline, the second part that I spoke about. We have to ask, we can answer a lot of our own problems and fix a lot of our own problems in life. If we sat down and asked ourselves, what is it that I want to achieve? What is it that I want to achieve? And how do I get there? Right? A lot of us can sit down and map that out, but we have to have accountability on how to get there, and be disciplined. And that's often, even in the first pillar, the being, spiritually, a lot of us, we fall into that. I'm spiritual, not religious kind of, nuance. And all that just means you don't want to have any accountability. I want to have a relationship with God, but I don't want to be accountable to him. Right? That's all that means. And same thing with our mental aptitude here. A lot of us really know what it takes to be a little tougher, to maybe be a little bit more successful in life, but we don't have the motivation, right? Like I said. And so we just don't do it. We feel like, I don't feel like it. You're following your feelings. No, you know what to do. It's just you're not accountable and you're not being disciplined enough. And I know that's not everyone. Everyone's going to have a different story. Everyone's going to have exceptions to the rule here. But all of us can be a little bit more disciplined. All of us can do a little bit better and achieve a little bit more of ourselves in all facets of our lives if we're just more disciplined. And we have to be accountable. This is why, in our church, we have confessors and spiritual fathers, because if we're not held accountable, we will find a way to take it the easier path, and we'll take it easy on ourselves.
Amen. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got pillar number 1, be spiritual, follow God. Pillar number 2, develop mental toughness and resilience, ideally through discipline. Right. And then what is pillar number 3? It's
probably something that we both, I know, as we talked before, that a little interest of us both, but it's to be physically healthy. We as men are not in this society, for many reasons, we're not very healthy people. You can just look at the obesity rates here in our own country. You can look at the epidemic of low testosterone in men, young men, especially today. We are not a healthy people, and we cannot live a truly masculine, Orthodox masculine life in bad health. We all got health issues, but we all have a certain control in our lives to deal with it. Not all of us are going to be very physical specimens. We all have been given different gifts by God. But I think a lot of us truly don't believe how much potential that God has given us. We may not be the same as someone else, but we have been given a lot. We just have to go and achieve it. And so physically, we have to be good at working to be strong people. We have to be images of what a man would look like. I don't think God created us to be slothful. He didn't create us to be weak. He did not. He actually created us to toil. We from the very beginning, Adam was put in the garden to work, to till the land, and even get it even harder after the fall. But that was a punishment on us to go and till the rest of our lives. And so we live in a modern world where many of us probably don't do physical labor anymore. Majority of us, we're very sedentary in our lifestyles. We eat very highly processed junk food because that's what's readily and cheaply available to us. And it's been detrimental to us. And so I feel that we should take it kind of personal to be healthy, especially for us who have families. I'm a man. I've got 5 children. I'm married, as obviously, as I spoke about already. And I see them as they look at to me on how I live my life is how they're going to probably live their life. Maybe they can learn from my mistakes. I hope they do. But I also want to give them a good example of how to maybe move forward and do what Dad did. Oh my gosh, my dad gave me a good example of how to be healthy, how to work out, how to eat properly. And I think all of us should be mindful of that, especially for fathers.
Definitely. And I think this ties in a lot to the discipline question. We have a comment here that kind of ties into it too. Because several years ago, I got hit with a bout of this autoimmune condition, and my testosterone dropped significantly to the degree that I ended up doing a couple cycles of testosterone replacement therapy, which then I kind of overcorrected from my physical weakness from that, and ended up just committing 5.5 months to getting ripped, which was a lot of fun, to be fair. And now I'm taking Tongkat Ali and Shilajit and working out constantly. I mean, I do 10 hours, average maybe 8, 9, 10 hours a day, depending on the day of manual labor for work.
Wow.
Did boxing till recently, switched over to Krav Maga. And you're a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner. And I don't know if you know, do you know who Chael Sonnen is?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
So he describes testosterone better than anyone I've ever heard. He said testosterone makes effort feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And when I thought back on my workout routines, you know, when you're trying to maybe get that final rep out, you're either going to say, okay, well, I've done enough for today, or you're going to like nail it down and grind it out, right? And that difference often does come down to testosterone. And we were talking about this before the show. I'd love to get into it a little bit for the audience too. What do you feel? Because I've heard both sides of the argument, right? Like what you're saying, men should be strong, fit, healthy, etc. And I've also heard people say, you know, testosterone, and I know this from my TRT days, can also inflame pride. It can inflame lust, make you more willing and ready to get into a conflict, maybe even desire conflict at the extreme end. Where do you think the balance is there between staying in shape without getting vain and making sure you're healthy without making an idol of your body, or going too far into the passions that testosterone can inflame?
Well, we always got to start with what's the purpose of having a physically healthy body? What is the purpose? Well, one is it's so that we can glorify God, right? First, are we glorifying God, or are we glorifying ourselves? So we shouldn't approach any of this through a mode of vanity. You know, it's not. Certainly, that's a, you know, we can look better and more appealing to the eye, more attractive if we're physically healthy. That just comes with that. It is a man that's more physique. It's naturally more appealing. I mean, than a man who isn't. But that's not the sole purpose, right? We're not doing it for vanity. We're doing it to please God and to stay healthy. Because if we're healthy, then we can be better providers for our families. We can be better spiritual guides to, as me personally, I can, if I look like a slothful priest, who am I motivating? Who am I inspiring? Who am I being an example for? We always should be an example, as St. Paul says to us priests, but all to laity, we should be an example to the faithful. And so we have to start with that standpoint. If we do it, if that's the point, to glorify God, to be a healthier person, so I can be closer to God, then so be it. If we're doing it just for vanity's sake, we should question ourselves. Is this the right reason? So again, we got to follow that royal path and stay away from the extremes of laziness, of slothfulness, of don't caring about my body. And also we don't want to go to the extreme of presenting ourselves in you know, I'm just doing this to acquire women, to look, you know, good, to be selfish about myself, because we couldn't go to that extreme as well. So we gotta go that royal path right down the middle there.
Have you found that your jiu-jitsu practice has spiritual value for as well, in terms of maybe emotions that come up when you're rolling or anything of that, or maybe it's really humbling depending on who you're fighting or anything like that?
All the above. Yeah, it's jiu-jitsu is very humbling. It's very humbling. You know, I'm a journeyman, man. I've been doing jiu-jitsu for probably 20 years off and on. And why off and on? Well, because my life has taken me different places. I'm in the military. I've gone to seminary. I've become a priest. I've had children. I've had injuries. If anyone's done jiu-jitsu or any martial arts, you know, especially in jiu-jitsu, you're going pretty hard with, and the older you get, I'll be 43 this next week. When you're rolling with the 20-year-old, you feel old, even if you're not that old. You know, it's just they have an aggression and a strength that is just always amazing. And so you get injured a lot. I mean, it is, you know, you're injury prone. And so I've had to take breaks, long extended breaks. But yeah, it's very humbling. You know, you learn that you're limited on your prowess physically. You know, you learn how to control kind of your anger in these moments, but you also learn how to fight through some adversity, which again goes back to this being the previous one where we have to be mentally tough. Like I think everyone, a young boy should, you know, athletics can be a good outlet for them to learn a lot of good lessons in life, you know, on how to handle adversity, how to push yourself to past limits that you thought you couldn't get to. All that stuff I found in jiu-jitsu, and all, you know, I wrestled when I was younger, played football when I was younger. You know, all that stuff is real good lessons for men and for boys.
Yeah, and you're not wrong about feeling old. I started doing Krav Maga when I was 20, and then off and on for the last 15 years, just because I ended up moving a lot, and started going to classes again about a month and a half ago. And the injuries, it's way different. You don't recover as fast. You know, I used to be able to go 3-4 days a week and feel fine. And I got my ribs bruised in one of my first classes. That took 3 weeks to heal. I still kept going. I was just in pain the whole time. But yeah, it is very humbling too. And you're right. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead and finish up.
Oh, I was saying, I just started sparring again on Wednesday. Okay. And beforehand, my coach was saying, you know, people deal with this very differently, getting punched in the face.
Yeah.
Some people get mad. Some people cry. Some people cry, but they're still enjoying themselves. They don't understand what's going on. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, it didn't really affect me emotionally. But I can see how it's definitely a journey for some people, probably because I've done it before. I've been in a couple street fights when I was younger and done it. But I can definitely see an overcoming adversity, like you say, like, okay, when you get punched in the face, well, life punches you in the face sometimes, right? Do you keep going? Do you just kind of turtle up and cry in the corner? So it for sure ties into the discipline and the toughness you're talking about.
And I also want to go back and hit on this point about you mentioned it, and I mentioned it as well, as this low testosterone. It's a big deal, you know. Our fathers didn't go through this. Like the testosterone is not a bad thing. We think of people with high testosterone as these muscle bound, angry people, but low testosterone it does horrible things to you. It makes you feel like you're not who you were created to be. You know, we're not meant to have this, especially as young men, not to have low testosterone. You'll feel a lethargy. You'll feel like a little bit distance. In fact, you know, I talked about this with another priest friend of mine. He says in many cases when men come to me in confession and they're feeling they think they might be depressed, or they may feel like, you know, a little bit distance in the world. It may not be that they're mentally ill at all. They may have low testosterone. I mean, those are realities. And so, and a lot of this is an epidemic because of the food that we eat and the sedentary life we live. I mean, these are you know, physical activity builds testosterone. Eating healthily in certain foods builds testosterone. And it's almost like it was meant to do this with this food pyramid that we pushed on us for decades, that actually kind of reversed this. You know, we're eating the wrong foods, and we're eating cheap processed foods. It's done, and I think plastics is an issue. I think that's been documented to do issues. So we have to be mindful of this, especially as priests. When young men come to us, it may not be that they're depressed. It may not be that they have some kind of mental clinical issue. They may just have low testosterone, and they need to get physically active, and they need to maybe have a better diet.
You know, I found out something years ago that's changed the way I act at the grocery store, because the paper that the receipts are printed on, it has endocrine disruptors on it a lot of the time. And even if you touch the receipt for a second, if it's one of the ones coded in this particular kind of thing, it gets right into your bloodstream. Like, it doesn't matter if you wash your hands afterward. So I won't touch receipts anymore because of this. Once I found out it was messing with my hormones.
Wow.
Yeah. So just a tip for anyone listening, don't touch receipts. They're very bad for you, and it doesn't matter if you wash your hands. Once it's in, it's in.
Bring receipts, but don't touch them.
Yes, exactly. Maybe just bring some tongs to the grocery store, wear some gloves. Do you ever recommend supplements or to your parishioners who you feel might be struggling with this, or do you take any yourself?
Well, I don't recommend anything, because I just don't. I suggest people, you know, do a little research. But personally, I take vitamin C, vitamin D, and zinc every day. It's been a habit now for ever since I've always took some vitamin supplements, but I more intentionally now since the whole COVID thing. I've researched and knew that vitamin D, vitamin C, and zinc were very helpful for your immune system. And so I do take that. I've taken creatine pretty consistently in the past. I do know friends who have TRT. They do, you know, testosterone replacement therapy because they've had low TRT. I have not had mine checked. I've not felt the lethargy though. It's I'm not against, you know, anyone who might need that clinically. I think that's a good idea for them if they do it. So overall, just a good diet. You know, I was well, you know, about 4 or 5 years ago, I was really overweight. I've lost like 60, 70 pounds in a couple years.
Wow.
Because I had a health scare, you know, I got away from eating correctly, consistently exercising, and it was an eye opener. You know, you start getting high blood pressure, you get, a little bit anxious and anxiety ridden, it should be an eye opener to you that, you need to take command of your life, and you have the ability to do it.
Hmm. Yeah, and I just want to throw out a caveat to testosterone replacement therapy because I did 2 cycles. First of all, it's great, and there's a danger of getting dependent on it if you can't restore it naturally, which thank God I've been able to without it. And there's also a lot of other stuff. The expense of the drug itself can also affect the thickness of your blood. Some guys have to give blood constantly when they're on it because it makes their blood so thick. If they're not drinking enough water, it can wreck your fertility. So you got to take stuff to prevent that. You got to take estrogen, estrogen blocker sometimes as well because it boosts that. So if you do go on it, if your doctor and your priest decide for no listening that it's okay for you, just know it's a very complicated thing with a lot of potential downsides too.
Absolutely.
You'll definitely get in shape if you're exercising, but
I'm not coming as a doctor or a fitness coach here, but these are just kind of common sense kind of prescriptions here that we all should be really eating right, take good supplements, and be physical, do something every day. It doesn't. I would recommend you getting like you said, a martial art or go take up running, do something that challenges you. I mean, even if it's just taking a long walk every day, you should do something physically every day. We need to do something physically. We have to toil a little bit.
Yeah. And with bodybuilding, with lifting weights, the concept of progressive overload is very important, where each time you go in, you add a little bit. It's a little bit harder. I feel like as long as you're doing something that follows that principle, if you just do the exact same thing every day, you're not going to grow, right? If you lift the same amount of weights, the same amount of reps, the same amount of sets every time you go in the gym, you might get a decent workout, burn some calories, but you're not going to grow. You're not really challenging yourself. And it's important for a man to have challenges to, achieve things, goals to accomplish, difficulties to overcome, like you were saying.
Yes, 100%. I agree.
So, my point on the TRT was just, if you're going to do it, go to a real doctor and not some dude in the locker room at your gym who maybe doesn't know all the other things that go along with it.
Right.
So we have an interesting comment. Don't forget about fasting, especially those with kidney problems should get them a break from protein. So where does fasting come into all this about health and discipline?
Well, fasting is, a prescription from the church. In the wisdom of the church tells us that we need to, fasting allows us to control ourselves, to show to learn discipline, as we talked about. And this is all that is. It really is one of those things that we control the passions of our body through fasting by bringing them under control. That we're not a slave to the desires of our flesh. And so fasting is gives us that ability, and that's why the church rightly gives us these periods, as long as we are in right now, the nativity fast, these long periods to put that into action. But if you're physically healthy, it's difficult. I know I lift weights, and I noticed this week I could not lift the same amount of weight that I lifted just a week ago. It's because we're in a fasting period. I am deficient in a lot of the protein I normally get. That's a reality. And so you can supplement that to a degree with some vegetable, some vegetable proteins and other, but it is a reality. And then maybe the feeling of being weak is a good one for us sometimes to humble us a little bit. So. But these are abstinence things. I think the fasting of the liver there, what they were, I think you would have to, be off things for a long time. I'm a big proponent that protein is actually very good for us. I haven't researched it about not having protein. If you look at the differences between somebody who gets an adequate amount of protein and those done physically, it's night and day.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to tell sometimes how much of the dosage is like marketing hype, like the gram per pound of body weight or whatever.
Sure.
But you definitely need some if you're working.
Everyone's different. Everyone's going to be a little different. Yeah.
Yeah. But if you're doing anything that breaks down muscle tissue, you have to get protein to rebuild it. Whether it's a combat sport, any sport, weightlifting, etc.
Yes.
Okay. So what is the next? I believe we're on number
4.
4. Yes. The next pillar of your program.
So this one, it might be, it's not controversial, but maybe somebody can take it that way, but it's to be emotionally grounded. We have to be grounded as men, oftentimes, I think a lot of people who want to make masculinity as a toxic thing that to be avoided, you get here to be in touch with your feelings. It's okay for a man to be in touch with their feelings. I agree. But we have to be grounded. We have to be not, again, extreme in both. We shouldn't be hyper emotional people. In fact, the church fathers speak of the virtue of being dispassionate, right? That we shouldn't allow the passions to rise in our bodies. This is not an endeavor that the ascetics did. We have to fight that. And we shouldn't also not be one that avoids our feelings altogether, but we have to have a balance here. And that's why I say we have to be emotionally grounded. The scriptures say, that there's a season for everything. There really is. There's a time to laugh. There's a time to cry. And so we have to just know the appropriate reaction in situations and use that. We can't be too high strung. We can't be too low, not in touch with anything. Excuse me. And so we have to practice this emotional grounding as a man.
And it's very difficult sometimes.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. we can't be a slave to our flesh. Just like we said, we fast. We just mentioned about fasting and controlling our appetites and our diets every now and then. We have to do the same thing with our emotions. We got to keep them in control. We can't let them run us. And so we got to be able to show compassion and love to people. That's an emotion sometimes. That's a real emotion, a virtue that we have to be okay with. Maybe some hyper masculine Andrew Tate types think that's a weakness. I don't believe that's a weakness, but I also don't think that we need to be overly sappy and emotional about what is compassion and what's love. And we don't need to be so quick to anger and go all, we have to be emotionally grounded. That's a principle that when you see it, you know what it is.
Definitely. Do you have any tips for young guys who might have difficulty with that? And I think it plays into what we were talking about earlier about diet too. Whether your diet's bad or you're a smoker or a heavy drinker or using drugs, your emotions are always going to be up and down because you're going to be getting high on some chemical or crashing from some chemical. Just as bad with diet as with certain drugs. So I think part of it would be minimizing those bad influences. But what else do you typically recommend to people in your parish, for example, when you're trying to teach them this?
Well, there's a quote from from the Divine Ladder of Ascent. Saint John Climacus. He says, "Fear is danger tasted in advance. A quiver as it heats takes fright before unnamed calamity. Fear is a loss of assurance." And so I think we need to have a spirit of not being fearful, to take chances and risks. This is part of being not emotional. I think we live in a society that's afraid of fear, afraid of taking chances and risks. And so we have to really try to not be fearful, at the same time, not to be crazily take risk. And so this will ground us emotionally. So we have to have a balance. So I always tell people, just if you feel strongly about something, you should try to control it. If we're overly have a strong emotion either way, we need to control it and bring it back, because our bodies, whether it's because of our condone in society or whether we have a physiological reaction to something in our emotions, it's probably not taking us in the right direction. We have to keep it under control. So if you're strong about something, rein it in a little bit and use your reasoning. Reasoning is not necessarily a bad thing. Our rational minds are good. And so we have to be rational thinkers, not reactionary all the time.
Gotcha. Okay, great. So what is the fifth pillar here?
All right. So physical healthy. Sorry, So morally principled here is the number 5. So we have to be more a man of morals, and we have to have our moral grounding, especially as Orthodox Christians, based on the teachings of the Church and of the Scriptures. And we primarily see this, and we can see this right away in the and the scriptures in the Decalogue, in the Ten Commandments of our Lord. I mean, these are the first morals really laid out for us Christians, and we have to be very ardent in fulfilling our morals. If we allow society to dictate what is moral, then we're not principled people. We're changing with every day, because everything that is decided in a secular world is always progressing in a direction. You're always going to be flailing in the wind if you allow society to dictate what is morally correct. And so we have to be strong and stick to it. We stick to what Christ has taught us in the Gospels, and what God revealed in the Old Testament to his people.
Absolutely. I got a question here in the comments that's not strictly related to what you just said, but I feel that it is an important question and something that requires discernment and nuance. James Bancroft asks, how do I respect a priest's opinion and treat him reverently, yet at the same time not view him as infallible and suss out errors he may make?
Okay. Yeah, it's probably a good question. I don't know how it is, but respect we should be able to respect everyone. We should be able to respect people we disagree with, right? So I don't know why it's hard to give people respect, especially people who maybe a little bit more experienced than us in a certain area, right? We should be able to give them respect. Doesn't mean we have to necessarily allow them to control us and control how we feel, how we think, and but we need to honor them a little bit. Someone asked me this in my parish the other day with regard to probably priests, probably also into clergy. It says, how do I respect people? I says, well, oftentimes even if we don't respect them, we're called to love them and treat them with honor, right? We're supposed to. This is a scriptural thing. We're supposed to honor those in authority. To a degree, we don't have to. If they're wrong, we don't have to go along with their wrongness, but we have to honor them. We have to show some respect, and this is actually one of the principles we'll get to. It's actually the last principle on the. So we can kind of go over this, but we are called to honor people, especially not because of their position, but because we are Christian men. That's what we do. We have to be able to give people honor if we want to earn respect ourselves.
Okay, yeah, let's get to that one after number 6 then, so we can tie it a little more into the comment.
Yeah.
So number 5, being morally grounded and principled, which largely means death to the world, not taking our moral compass from the TV. It's basically just a devil box sitting in the room. And I say that as someone who watches movies and TV more than I would ideally like to, but I try to be intentional about what I watch.
Right.
So what is number 6?
To be financially responsible. I know this doesn't seem like a Christian principle of masculinity, but I think it truly is. We are called to be good stewards. We've got several parables in the scriptures about finances. In fact, it was pointed out to me that Christ spoke about possessions and finances more than he did about love and humility, about asceticism, about fasting, about prayer, everything except for actually the parables of the kingdom of God. He spoke about finances and possessions more about that. So it's an important topic as a Christian. And so we should be mindful of how we use our finances, our resources, our talents, as we hear in the Gospels. It's a very important principle. And certainly, I don't know how much financial literacy a lot of us have. Maybe we learn it through the hard way after making some mistakes. I know I certainly did as a young man coming out of college. I certainly was a little bit less than smart with regard to my finances. It took some hard lessons to learn, and so we have to be financially responsible, especially if we're fathers, especially if we're married. We have to be providers. We're called to provide. we see this in scripture. Paul says, if you don't work, you shouldn't eat. We can't be lazy. We have to, in the Old Testament, we're supposed to go and work. You read the Proverbs. The book of Proverbs is full about of people being prudent with finances and their work ethic be providers. And so it's very important as a Christian man that, one, especially if you're a father, that you are a provider. And it should be seen as a duty. It's not a means to an end. We don't practice the prosperity gospel. Christ is certainly warning us over and over again in the gospels of the dangers of the spirit of acquisition and how it's most difficult for wealthy people to enter the kingdom of heaven. That is a reality, but also a reality is that we're supposed to provide for those who are in our care. And if we don't do that, I think in Peter, he says in the book of the epistles, to look it up, but if we're not providing, then we might as well be somebody of unbelief. We might as well be an apostate, is in the epistle, the first epistle Peter says.
That's really good point. I mean, as you were talking, I was thinking about my own life, and I was probably financially illiterate till I was about 30, which is not to say that I didn't have jobs or my own business and make money. I just knew absolutely nothing about saving, investing. I had no bigger picture for those things. And it's really sad that I could go all the way through high school and get my college degree and not ever learn that. Do you have any financial literacy resources that you think could spare people from the pain of learning from their mistakes and having to figure it out the hard way?
There's probably a lot of resources out there that I won't recommend, but I will just say that, we just need to be prudent with how we use our money, and know that it's that we don't want to be controlled by acquiring. I know when I came out of college, my senior year in college, I couldn't even concentrate on my schoolwork. I just was looking forward. I want out of here. I want to go make some money. Right. That was my mindset. I didn't care. Took a ton of different jobs that whatever was going to pay more, I went with it. But that's not edifying. That's not about salvation. We have to use our finances in a proper way. So first and foremost, we have to be a little bit more good stewards of what God has given us, right? So let's do good things with it first. And that should be to provide for our family. We should be able to be willing and generous to those around us that are in need. And we should be with our parish communities. Sadly, as an Orthodox, we are really bad about supporting our churches. So if we can, financial literacy aside, don't take so many risks with your money, but you have to invest it wisely. We have the parables of the talents telling us not to just bury it, but also to be smart with it. So we have to be prudent. I'm not a financial advisor, so I'm not here to give financial advice in any way on that. But I think we know when we're being a little bit, we just living outside of our means. Right. This is the worst thing we can do as a Christian, live outside our means to overly take out too much debt. These are all things that we need to avoid. Just basic things, live within your means, get a good job, the best of your ability to provide for your family, and be generous with what God has given you. And be content with it. I mean, the Gospels are full of that, just being content with it.
Yeah. And I want to add to that. There's a website, I think it's also a financial service, but I don't pay anyone to do that kind of thing for me, called Inspire Investing. I believe it's Inspire Investing, where if you're looking at stocks or companies to invest in, it's a Christian website. You enter the stock ticker into their search bar, and it will show you all of their social activism. So like if they promote LGBT stuff or abortion stuff, it will give them a negative score on those things.
Oh, okay.
And so you can actually, if you want to be intentional and God-pleasing with your investment, and this is the service that I use, at least the website, the free website, you can make sure that you're not helping to promote companies that spread evil through the world.
So this is the anti-ESG.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Okay.
Let me see what the specific score is called. I think they also show the ESG scores on it. But it's amazing because if you look through basically any of the top 100 companies in this company, if not top 3 or 4 or 500, they're all promoting sin.
Yeah, right. 100%.
They don't win their little awards unless they're part of, biblically responsible investing, inspiredinvesting.com. They're all part of it, and it's horrifying. But I will also tell you, if you avoid the big companies that are doing this stuff, many times you will make more money with these small kind of unheard of companies that aren't promoting degeneracy than with some of the bigger, more popular blue chip companies. And I also want to encourage people. There are specifically Christian mutual funds. The Catholics have a few groups, the Roman Catholics, that create these Catholic mutual funds. Supposedly they're baskets of stocks, or index funds rather. It's both, stocks that avoid all the degeneracy, but you can't really trust them, because I've looked through the specific stocks in some of these mutual funds and indexes that they have, and they miss a lot. So I encourage people to take the time to actually go through every individual stock. This is why I don't invest in index funds at all, because you get a basket of 100 companies, most of them are going to promote degeneracy in some way. And some people have told me I'm being overly scrupulous. Some people have told me that saving and investing is a sin because it's usury. You're making money off interest with a savings account. I believe in the royal path, the financial royal path. Usury is the usury was forbidden because you're taking advantage of poor people and oppressing them. It's not about making a couple percent that's less than inflation in the savings account, in my opinion.
Well,
you have any thoughts on that?
Well, we have the parable of talents with the Lord, kind of got after somebody who buried his treasure and said, you could at least give it to the bankers and made some interest on it for me.
Yeah, well, there you go.
I mean, it's pretty, I know we're speaking more in it's a spiritual allegory, but it's at the same time, there is some literal truth to what he's saying in this parable.
Yeah, and if you can do it responsibly, and like you said, if you have a family and you're planning on having more kids than you have, whether you have none and you want one, or you got one, you want 5, if you're just holding on to money, burying it in your backyard and not gaining some percent on it in a moral way, you're actually doing a disservice to your family's future, in my opinion.
And money's not evil. It's the use of money that's evil. And we don't need to get into, exposition of scripture on this here, but, money can be, when we acquire it in an unrighteous way, we can use our mammon to be a friend, as Christ said, use your unrighteous mammon so it'll be a friend of yours, at the very least. But, I think what we need to take about this financial thing is, as you said, the royal path. Let's not be too crazy with our money. Let's use it wisely. Let's invest it wisely to the best of our ability and be content and live within our means. I think if we can just start right there, I think a lot of us, will be okay. We're fulfilling this masculine trait, and our kids will see it too. They'll learn from it, on how I'm always mindful, because I have children. I'm always mindful that they're learning from me, and so I want them to see how they maybe should do it when they're older too.
Yeah, and balance and nuance in the royal path is so important. I remember, as we're talking, I saw on the Roosh V forum, where I participate when I'm not fasting from social media posting, there was a guy, we have threads on all this stuff, finance, family. It's an Orthodox forum now, thank God. This one guy was saying he doesn't feel comfortable starting a family yet because he only has like $1.5 million in savings, and he didn't feel like he'd be able to provide with that, which to me is way extreme. That to me, that's almost like a lack of trust in God that he's going to help you provide if you're faithful. If you have $1 million in savings, you are so far ahead of the average American. Don't let that stop you from asking a girl for her phone number. Right. To anybody listening.
Yes. Yeah. I would say he's going in the wrong direction here. But
well, less than half of all Americans I saw have $1,000 saved.
Sure. Yeah. 100%.
Which is astonishing.
And that's the other thing with financial responsibility, or just financial wherewithal, to understand that our Christian understanding too is not to be anxious about things. So certainly we need to be hard workers, and we need to not be lazy and rely on handouts primarily. But also we know that God will take care of us, not in a sense like the prosperity gospel that he's going to bless us financially, but we shouldn't be anxious about our lives to the degree where we're paralyzed with finances. He's got $1 million, in this instance, $1 million. He's still paralyzed. God's, how many families make do with what they got, despite, not being wealthy.
Yeah. And it's hard not to stress about money. I mean, when I was single, I never stressed about money. I could have $40 in my bank account, be like, oh, I'm sure I'll figure something out.
Yeah.
But once you're married, and for you having kids, that changes so much.
Yeah.
Where you're now not just responsible for yourself anymore, and you can always crash on a buddy's couch or something if you're single. You can't really do that with a wife, right? She's not going to like that too much.
Yeah, no.
It's hard. It's hard to remember. If God takes care of the sparrows and the flowers, how much more will He take care of us? And
Yes.
it's just very difficult. So for anyone listening, please pray for me that I can remember that in my times where I'm like, oh, I haven't gotten a raise. I've been here for 5 months already. What's going on?
Yeah.
Which, I mean, they gave me one eventually, but this whole couple of weeks ago, I was stressing out. I was like, do I switch companies? What do I do? What do I do? And it's hard to be in remembrance of God sometimes when you feel the squeeze, but those are the times it's most important to, right?
Right. And then all these principles it's a holistic approach, right? They're all overlapping for one reason. Being financially responsible also means, being, a little bit trustworthy and spiritually, right? Have faith. It's hard to say sometimes, but we got to be a little bit faithful and understand that all these principles work together. We can't be striving to be so financially secure in ourselves that we forget that to rely on the help of God, which we can do nothing without Him.
Yeah, because then you're just making yourself God and trying to rely on yourself to provide for yourself.
Correct.
And I remember when I was a Protestant, the pastor time gave the sermon about greed, and he said he knew some guy with tens of millions of dollars, and he asked this guy, and the guy was just obsessed, like working the 60-hour weeks to make even more money. And he once asked the guy, he said, how much is going to be enough for you? And the guy said, more. And he really was highlighting what an empty, meaningless life that is.
Yes.
I don't remember if it was him that brought this up or someone else, but I guess Buddhism has this concept of a hungry ghost, where if you think about a hungry ghost, a ghost has no body, right? It can't process food or feel full, and yet it's hungry. So no matter what it does, it's going to continue to be hungry because it's not full internally. And that concept of the hungry ghost always struck me. I'm trying not to be like that.
Sure. That's what it means to be a slave to the passions in general. In every facet, and every passion you could think of. There's no satisfying it.
Yeah, and in the pickup artist world that Roosh came from as well, there's no limit. Guys were there for different reasons. Some guys got into it to find a girlfriend or to get married. A lot of guys just wanted to sleep around. It's like, well, what number is going to be satisfying for you? They didn't have a number in mind. It was always more and more and more, or this many of this kind or from this country. It's the same thing with money, like you're saying, the same concept of being a slave to a passion that is fundamentally not. It can't be fulfilled, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
You're just chasing your.
And in the end, as we heard, at least in my church this past Sunday, if you're successful in fulfilling your barns with full of grain, you'll get the call and say, "You fool, tonight your life will be needed to be accounted for," right? And so in the end, we all should be. All of these principles should be for one purpose, for our judgment on the day of death, right? Did I work towards a good judgment before Christ?
Absolutely. And I believe that brings us to number 7, which we touched on earlier.
Yes.
Which I think you said was honoring people.
So it means so a man will give honor and earn respect. Oftentimes it's the other way around. We just want to expect to be or expect to be respected. And then we so often, especially in our younger generations today, they don't really honor people. They're so quick to judge. All of us are quick to judge, but even more so some younger generations. It's I know I was raised with a father that instilled a lot of respect in our household. When we met strangers, even people that we didn't know, we had to go out of our way to show them honor, and to be. I don't necessarily see that in society. I did do some in between job stuff. As a substitute teacher in the schools. What I saw in those schools and younger generations is not to cast a big broad brush on all of them all, but I was surprised. There's very little. I'm 43. I don't consider myself old, but I feel old compared. When I go just 10, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, it might as well have been the 1930s. It seems like that's how big of a change society has made, and we don't have a lot of people who honor And this is one of the things that Christ called us to do right away in the Old Testament. We're called to worship and adore God first off, right? So we have to be, of course, honor our Lord, but also he says to honor your mother and your father, and that means as they get older too, you're honoring them by taking care of them. Even with our neighbors, we're supposed to honor our neighbors by not lying about them, bearing false witness. We're not supposed to idolize their wives and their possessions, and so to do that is to dishonor them. And so a lot of us do this. We pass judgment on people. We idolize their possessions, their wives. Sometimes we're so free to maybe pass judgment on them. This is in a way a dishonoring of them, bearing false witness sometimes. So we have to show honor. And the Holy Apostle Paul, he says that, to Timothy, he says that we're supposed to to the Romans, outdo one another in showing honor, that we have to outdo them. This is, St. Paul says. And so that means we have to put effort into outdoing people and honoring you. And when we do this, we're earning respect from individuals. The question earlier, can you repeat it? It was about the priest, that how do we respect priests that you disagree with?
Sure. The question was, here, I'll put it on the screen. How do I respect a priest's opinion and treat him reverently, yet at the same time not view him as infallible and suss out errors he may make?
Okay. Well, so I would say, one, to answer this, why are we looking? This is a mistake I made at Pavey. Why are we looking for mistakes in people? Why are we trying to find the sins in people? If you're finding yourself always looking at someone and trying to find fault in them, one, we're not honoring them like we're called to do, and two, we're really fooling ourselves into delusion that I'm better than them. I know better. I'm in this place of judgment where I can find out I'm sussing out these wrongs in him that he's teaching. It's not your job. Take what's good and use it from him. And we have the account of Noah after the water cleared, and he's having his first encounter with what we know as wine, and he gets drunk. And we're given a spiritual lesson about, are we supposed to point this out? Are we supposed to cover his sin? Right? We speak, we know this. We, even in the canon of St. Andrew, we hear about this during the Lenten cycle. His sons that covered his sin were blessed, while the one who mocked him was not, right? So we have to, first off, I think we should, part of the honor is to look to cover our brother's sin, especially those of our elders. We should try to cover it to a degree, right? If someone is really harming people, doing something outwardly wrong, I mean, there's things that we can do, right? And the church tells us, speak to them one-on-one, in person, right? First and foremost, see if they can change their ways. If not, then go to into groups of 2 or 3. And so there's ways to handle this, but we have to show them honor. Otherwise, don't expect the respect in return. It's that simple. And I think we need to put this in practice. And I think this is a manly thing to do, really, a really manly thing to do. It's not toxic at all. In fact, it's very important that we show respect for those people that are, because if we can't, then how are we going to respect the traditions of the church? How are we going to, respect our parents? These main things that are going to get us to into the kingdom of heaven that God is commanding us to do. So I to who left that question, I hope that answered it a little bit, or gave some perspective on it.
Yeah, he followed up saying he thinks the mistake he's making is trying to look to priests or others for certainty, like kind of, from what I'm gathering, kind of like an inner desire for an infallible answer. Who do I look to give me the absolute truth no matter what? And then maybe there's some disappointment that comes in with that, realizing, hey, your priest's just a person too.
Right. Well, the Holy Spirit is the Spirit of truth, right? So we seek first the Holy Spirit to, and we know that the Holy Spirit is spoken through saints, it guides the church. And so we look at that. But there's also ways to apply the wisdom and the truth in the church. So I think oftentimes we look at our priests as they make exceptions, they make pastoral decisions, and so we judge them by it, because that's obviously not the letter of the law. So we're confused by it. Remember that any pastoral application that a priest may give somebody it should not be the rule itself. An exception does not become the rule. And oftentimes we disagree with our priest because he did something, but remember, maybe that's not for you. That's for that individual. We don't have a person of infallibility in our church, in the Orthodox Church, as says is the Roman Catholic Church. I know that some Roman Catholics that have converted or in proselytizing have difficulty with that. They have to overcome that idolization of the Pope. That's not our church. You have to be a little bit, and I hate to say this because I might draw some people to get very angry with me right now. We have to be comfortable with a little bit of gray in the church. It is a thing. I mean, we have things that are written, we have practices and traditions that are pretty cut and dry, but in applying them in a pastoral way, there is some gray area. And I know some people just don't like to hear that, but that's part of the pastoral science that only experience and wisdom, many years in the priesthood or as a bishop that you'll come to see, because you're dealing with a lot of people's souls.
In terms of whether people like or dislike what you said, I've learned that one of the nice things about being online is that anything you say or don't say or do or don't do will be taken by someone as proof that you're evil. So, right. You don't have to worry about it too much. It's almost a guarantee. Okay. But no, that's a really good point. Some people I know will be hyper strict on specific canons, but then if they actually took the time to look through the canons, specifically penances for certain sins from the ancient world, these are never applied. Because you would quickly not have the parish anymore.
Sure.
Because the people back then, they were stronger than us in so many ways.
I had a priest that was one of my teachers in seminary, and he says, "Well, tell me a canon that you fulfill, and I'll tell you two that you break." And it's true. I mean, it's just hard to live our lives. This is what this is what the Pharisees did in times of Christ. They tried to double down, right? Over and over again, the Jews had in their history have got in a bad relationship with God because they didn't fulfill the law, right? They were kind of backtracking on their what they were called to do by Scripture, by the prophets. They've been calling. The Pharisees, in order to do that, they almost doubled down, like, okay, we're going to follow everything to a T, and maybe even make it a little even harder, And so that's. But our Lord told us not to fall into this trap that the Pharisees did. And that's why he's always found himself in an argument with the Pharisees. It seemed like, and in every other page of the New Testament, it's because he's trying to warn us, like, no, this is not the way. I mean, the Pharisees had very good intentions on what they were doing, but that's not the way. That's not the way. That's not the way of mercy. That's not the way of the gospel.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for all of this, Father. My last question to you. Most of my audience, it's like 97, 98% male between 18 and 45. Got about 8,500, a little more than 8,500 subscribers. So if you could reach that demographic with one kind of summary or overarching message, what advice would you give to people in that demographic, which I belong to myself?
Sure. So I think a lot of us, if our eyes are open to the world that we currently reside in, whether that is in the world that you are in your parish, the world that you see online or at work, you'll see that we have fallen into an area that is kind of scary. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of unhappy people out there, people that, as we already discussed, that have a lot of mental illness. There's a lot of anxiety over the way we live our lives. There's a lot of divisiveness. And I think all of this falls squarely on us, on men. I think that we have lost connection to what our purpose is in life. And primarily that is in our spiritual life, that we've lost connection with who God has called us and created us to be, and we don't strive for it. But also we've lost just the simple things of being hard providers, or good providers, hard workers, people who have do physically demanding things in our lives. And this has made our world kind of soft. And unfortunately, we have a lot of social deranged people out there that can't even tell you what a man or a woman is, you know? And so I feel that we need to convict ourselves that it's our fault, men's fault. It's not women's fault. It's not the young people's fault. It's our fault because we have not stepped up to the plate. We are the leaders of our families. We have traditionally been the leaders of society, though I'm not saying that's primarily women can't lead a society, but primarily there is a hierarchy that is real. We can't deny it, and men were at the top of that. And so anything negative in our society is our fault. And so we have to reclaim what it means to be a man. And I think starting with these 7 principles, if we can work on these, and I'm not saying we're all going to be perfect, but we should strive to develop them and be better at them. And then I see that we can correct what society, maybe the direction society is going, but it starts with us. It starts with us as men. We have to be responsible for what's going on. We can't shift the blame. It's us.
I totally agree, and thank you for that, Father.
Sure.
Now, you also have a YouTube channel, as well as it's on other platforms as well. So if people were just introduced to you today and they like what you're saying and want to hear more from you, your sermons, your teachings, where can they find you?
So you think just go to YouTube. It's the Orthodox Experience with Father Michael. I think now we can do these. I think it's at Orthodox Experience is the new one. So youtube.com at Orthodox Experience, but it's the Orthodox Experience with Father Michael. You should be able to just search it. It'll come right up. So yeah, please come visit, see if be edified with anything you got there. If you don't like anything, just let me know, but I probably won't read it. I try not to.
It's probably best for your health not to, right? Part of mental resilience is ignoring the trolls.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Father. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for being here, for your questions, your comments. I hope you all have a wonderful Saturday. And of course, be sure to follow Father Michael's first principle of being spiritual by making sure to get to at least Divine Liturgy tomorrow morning.
100%. Well, God bless you. Have a good rest of your nativity and a very great upcoming feast.
Thank you,
bless
Father.
you all. All right. Bye-bye.